As the teams assembled in Rio for the season-opening Brazilian Grand Prix, the oil supertanker Exxon Valdez hit a reef in Prince William Sound, Alaska, and spilled over the next few days a total of 10.8 million US gallons, or 37,000 tons of crude oil into the water. It was the largest oil spill in US history until the Deepwater Horizon incident in 2010, and the isolated nature of the sound with no road access meant that the cleanup operation was much more difficult than it might otherwise have been. A series of failures were identified leading to the spill, including negligence by the ship's crew, but also by Exxon themselves, who'd left the ship's radar system inoperable for over a year rather than pay to fix it. And on race day itself, the USSR held its first ever legislative election. This was part of a reform package announced by General Secretary Gorbachev in January 1987. In December 1988, the old Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union had been dissolved to be replaced with the Congress of People's Deputies, an elected body. A third of the seats in the CPD were to be reserved for the Communist Party, but the remaining two-thirds would be elected. In the event, some 84% of the deputies elected were state-backed communists, but there were some notable defeats, especially in Moscow, where the official candidate was defeated by former Politburo member Boris Yeltsin. Other deputies included journalists, lawyers, sports stars and Nobel-winning physicist Andrei Sakharov. On the outskirts of Rio, meanwhile, everyone was getting ready for the start of a new season. Or most of them were, because the first team would not be present. Their chassis, disowned by its own designer as good for nothing except as an interesting plant pot, had failed the FIA crash test, and that was that. Over in France, meanwhile, businessman Didier Calmels had been arrested in February after shooting his wife Dominique dead before attempting to end his own life, and with one of their chief investors behind bars, the future of Gerard Larousse's team was rather up in the air as they awaited developments. And there would be one more absence from the paddock. A week or so before the Grand Prix, the AGS team had been testing at Rio when Philippe Streff had a huge accident at the fast right-hander before the back straight. Cameras missed the accident itself, but caught the car rolling over, shedding wheels, engines and gearbox and snapping the roll bar off at the mountings. The marshals quickly turned the car back over and pulled off Philippe's helmet, but between that and the accident itself, Streff sustained a broken shoulder and 2 fractured vertebrae. By the time of the Brazilian Grand Prix, the news was that he was out of mortal danger, but it was still touch and go whether he would walk again. The AGS team signed up Gabriele Tarquini, left without a seat after first's collapse, but would run just one car in Brazil. At the Jacarepagua circuit in late March, now the Autodromo Nelson Piquet, to give it its full name, the fans were enjoying the noise of the new era of Formula One, with the whine of the turbos replaced with the full-throated roar of V8, V10 and V12 power plants. The first order of business was pre-qualifying. The absence of the first team meant that there were 13 cars in the Friday morning session, and with Streff missing, there was an additional spot available in qualifying proper, making 5 up for grabs. It was immediately obvious that the revived Brabham team were going to be the ones to beat, and both Brundle and Modena sailed through, with Gregor Wojtek best of the rest just over 1.8 seconds slower than Martin's time. Larini and Schneider would join those 3 in qualifying, with the new Onyx team bottom of the heat by some distance, Gasho slowest of all, over 10 seconds off Brundle's time. With that done, Friday qualifying produced a bit of a surprise as Riccardo Patrese went fastest in the Williams with the new Renault power plant, beating Senna into second place, with Berger and Mansell going fast in the new Ferraris, but suffering from continuous reliability problems, often with the new semi-automatic gearbox cutting out. Saturday saw the red cars continuing to have problems. They both broke down in 3 of the 4 sessions, as Senna rallied to reclaim pole position at his home Grand Prix, beating Patrese's time by 0.87 seconds. But despite not setting a time on Saturday, the Italian was still quick enough to line up second, his first front row start since 1983, in his record 177th start. Berger was third in the Ferrari, setting an early marker for his new teammate Mansell back in 6th. Between them were Boutsen and Prost, the latter having had some difficulty setting his new car up, so 3 teams, McLaren, Williams and Ferrari, in the top 6. Capelli and Warwick were next, with Piquet 9th at the track named after him, and Johnny Herbert an outstanding 10th on his Grand Prix debut, just ahead of his team leader Nannini. The Brabhams were 13th and 14th, De Cesaris 15th in the Dallara, Nakajima back in 21st in the second Lotus, just ahead of Guiar, the only other debutant in the race. Chiva, struggling in a car too small for his lanky frame, could only manage to press 24th, with Alliot and Schneider making up the back row, and Alliot's teammate Dalmas just missing out but beating Arnoux, as well as Wojtek and Moreno. and so they lined up on Sunday afternoon with pundits keen to see how it would all shake out and predicting some teams could stop 2 or even 3 times for tyres during the course of the race. The conditions were hot and the track was abrasive. The lights went green, thank you helpful caption, and away they tore with Senna and Prix neck and neck and Berger moving over to take the inside line at turn 1. Which didn't turn out to be wide enough for 3 cars, and Berger and Senna touched, smashing off the McLaren's front wing and tipping Berger into a well-recovered near spin. So it was Prix who led the rest of the field around turn 1 with Boutsen behind, having lost his right wing mirror to flying McLaren debris. The damage to Berger's car, though, had proved terminal, and further back, Salah and Guiar had clashed in the midfield, wiping a wheel off the Minardi, which also retired. Senna fumed in for a new nose as the 2 Williamses led Mansell around, but the safety box around his feet had also been damaged and also needed replacing. He sat furiously in the car as the minutes ticked by, his home race comprehensively ruined. Behind Mansell, Prost was 4th, with Gugelmin up to 5th, and they all moved up 1 when Boutsen's Renault engine blew while the US coverage was off having an ad break. Mansell quickly moved up behind his old teammate, but given the Ferrari's shocking unreliability so far in testing, practice and qualifying, Prix probably wasn't too worried. Mansell had ruefully commented that at least that morning he'd managed to get out of the pit lane and had reverse gear if he wanted to go back in. It was going alright for now at least, though, as Mansell set fastest lap on lap 4 as he tucked right up behind the Williams. Prost was still 3rd, about 5 seconds behind the Ferrari, with Capelli 4th, Warwick 5th, and the Benettons of Nannini and Herbert 6th and 7th, Gugelmin 8th, Brundle 9th in the new Brabham, and De Cesaris a pretty decent 10th in the Dallara. It was not, however, a great day for the home crowd. Senna had to come in again for more repairs, and Piquet was also in and out several times before retiring on lap 10 with a defective fuel pump, so that left home hopes pinned on Gugelmin. He moved up to 7th when Herbert peeled in for his first ever F1 tyre stop, deliberately early so the pit lane wouldn't be too crowded. At around the same time, the race organisers black flagged Lorini Zazzella for having overshot his grid slot by a couple of metres, which seemed a little harsh. Mansell, meanwhile, was holding station behind Prix as the tyre stop window approached for those running 2-stop strategies. Prost was the first in, very early on lap 12, for a typically efficient McLaren stop, and then 4 laps later Mansell pulled out and took Prix for the lead at the end of the back straight. Capelli had also stopped, which put Warwick up to 3rd ahead of Gugelmin, at least until they both made their own stops. Derricks was slow, Gugelmin was half the length, and he was ahead on the track. Mansell, meanwhile, was pulling away from Prix, opening a gap of nearly 3 seconds before peeling into the pits on lap 20, almost exactly 1/3 distance. A decent but not great 10-second stop put him back out second, leaving Prix as the only front runner not to have stopped. Ricciardo's tyres were fading though, and Prost got passed into the lead before the Williams made its tyre stop on lap 34. As Prix disappeared into the pits out of shot, Mansell was closing in on Prost as the ESPN coverage went to yet another advert break. When they returned, the two were running close together, and before long Mansell went blasting past Prost at the same place he got past Prix earlier. The pundits had been saying that the Ferrari V12 was down on power compared to the Honda and Renault V10s, but it seemed to be doing okay at the moment. They also said it should have broken down ages ago, come to that. Before long, Mansell was some 9 seconds ahead of a cruising Prost, who was husbanding his tyres after his very early stop. Johnny Herbert, meanwhile, had made his way up to 4th ahead of teammate Nannini before Gugelmin got past the rookie's Benetton to take the place. So it was Mansell leading Prost, Warwick, Gugelmin, Herbert and Nannini, with Prost dropping further back and Warwick gaining on the McLaren to the tune of some 2 seconds a lap. Derrick had missed out on a podium slot in 1988 and was looking good, until he made his second tyre stop, and a stuck rear wheel and then a stalled engine on the getaway contrived to throw a very large spanner in the works. But not as large as that thrown in the works by Bernd Schneider's Zackspeed, which, missed by the cameras, shed a wheel under braking, causing it to slew right into Cheever's arrows and take them both out. So hot was it, over 40°C, 110 Fahrenheit, that the lanky Cheever, who had barely fit in his arrow's cockpit, collapsed and had to be helped off. His cockpit was so narrow that he had to turn sideways to get in and out of it, and had been unable to get out in the mandated 5 seconds, meaning the car had to be altered at the track. Prix, meanwhile, had recovered to 3rd after Warwick's misfortune and his own long stop, and was by now just 8 seconds or so behind Prost, with Gugelmin and Herbert behind him and Warwick clinging on to 6th. After a slightly longer middle stint, Mansell made his second pit stop on lap 44 and had a new steering wheel fitted after his original had come loose, but was still underway in under 14 seconds, putting him back on track second, right in front of Prix. But not for long, as Ricciardo was next in for his second stop. It was a good one, actually, but unless Nigel stopped again, it wouldn't be enough. The Brit, meanwhile, had used his fresh tyres to reel Prost in, catching him just as they both lapped De Cesaris in the Dallara. Before long, he was past Prost and back in the lead, and indeed De Cesaris was back past as well, as Alain's tyres were getting very worn. What commentators and pundits didn't know at the time was that Alain Prost had broken his clutch linkage and daren't stop for tyres in case he couldn't get moving again, so he was forced to do about 5/6 of the race on one set of tyres. As the race entered its closing stages, Mauricio Gugelmin had ended up in third, but was being chased by a fired-up Patrese, and both of them were reeling Prost in hand over fist. Soon those three were all running together, and Patrese lunged past Gugelmin, only to pull off and retire as his electrics died. Prost, grimly hanging on as the race entered its last 10 laps, now had Mauricio Gugelmin behind him, scenting a famous second place and possibly even a win if Mansell's Ferraris did what it should have done 50 laps ago and broke. He was certainly giving it the beans, with the Brazilian fans going berserk as they saw the potential for an unexpected home result. And now joining in the fight was Johnny Herbert, who was going great guns in his first race and repaying his team's faith in him. If he could finish on the podium, either by overtaking Gugelmin or if Prost or Mansell had a problem, he could cap a fantastic debut weekend. Mansell was still cruising in the lead as the Prost-Gugelmin-Herbert battle continued, with just 4 laps to go, and to everyone's surprise, not least Nigel's, the car went the distance. Nigel Mansell took his 14th race win, becoming the first driver to win his Ferrari debut since Mario Andretti in 1971, and incidentally taking Ferrari's first win in Brazil since 1978, and the first Formula One win for a V12-powered car since 1979. Nigel won't have cared about any of that, though, delighted and relieved to have finally put his nightmare 1988 behind him. In fact, he joked afterwards that he'd actually booked himself an early flight home to miss the crowd, so certain was he that his car wouldn't last more than a few laps. Prost hung on to take second, with Gugelmin taking a very popular third and Herbert a fantastic fourth on his debut. Warwick and Nannini made up the last of the points places, the pair having had a ding-dong battle over the last couple of laps, entirely ignored by the Brazilian TV director. As Mansell nursed the hands he'd cut on the trophy when it was presented on the podium, he will have been looking forward to the next race, Ferrari's home race at Imola, and the fans were too, with the Brazilian Grand Prix having shown that maybe McLaren's dominance would be challenged this year. But that was a month away yet, and a lot of teams had a lot of work to do before that.